welcome everyone to this little webinar on the action review of the IPBES Second Global Assessment. So, first we will have a little welcome introduction from Rainer Schliep. Then I will introduce you to IPBES and IPBES assessments, what they are. Emma will present the second global assessment and where input is most needed from reviewers. So yes, sorry, there was a slight change between Isabel and Emma, as Isabel was not able to come anymore. Emma has she presented herself, a veteran of IPBES, and she's also a coordinating lead author in the chapter 3 of the second global assessment. And finally, I will spend a little time to tell you how to register concretely and write comments that have more chance to be taken into account. And we will finish with a little Q&A session. So first, I will leave you the floor, Rainer, to introduce yourself and this webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Marie-Claire, for your introduction. I'm the co-lead of Work Package 5 Biodiversa Plus on internationalization, together with my colleague Rob Hendricks from the Netherlands. Yeah, and I'm happy to introduce you to the work of Biodiversa Plus, the European Biodiversity Partnership, and that is dedicated to driving biodiversity research and innovation. Biodiversa Plus brings together scientists, policymakers, and research projects to tackle global challenges in nature conservation through collaboration and cutting-edge science. And next slide, please, Marie-Claire. At its core, Biodiversa Plus connects funders and researchers across Europe and the Global South to advance biodiversity research. Its network supports projects that generate essential knowledge on biodiversity and ecosystem services, providing the scientific evidence needed to inform policies that protect nature and sustain life on Earth. On the bottom of the slide, you see the 5 main objectives of Biodiversa Plus, and I will focus here on Objective 5, strengthen the relevance and impact of pan-European research on biodiversity in a global context. Next slide, please. One of the key partnerships of Biodiversa Plus is with IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. This collaboration involves several types of cooperation, assessing knowledge and strengthening the knowledge foundations, building capacity, supporting policy. And this partnership works in 2 directions. Slide 3, please. Firstly, Biodiversa Plus projects directly feed into IPBES assessments. The research findings from Biodiversa Plus projects ensure that IPBES assessments are informed by the latest and most comprehensive scientific evidence available. One example of this collaboration is the thematic fact sheets developed by Biodiversa Plus based on research findings from our projects, which have made important contributions to the regional IPBES assessment for Europe and Central Asia. Next slide, please. Secondly, Biodiversa Plus uses the knowledge gaps identified in IPBES assessments to shape targeted research funding. And this ensures that resources are directed where new evidence is most needed. A good example is the close cooperation on transformative change in 2024. The year of the adoption of the IPBES Transformative Change Assessment, Biodiversa Plus launched its Biodiv Transform Call, supporting research that addresses the knowledge gaps identified in the aforementioned IPBES assessment. Beyond funding, Biodiversa Plus also promotes the participation of European experts and national focal points in IPBES. This helps bring European expertise into the global dialogue while strengthening the link between regional research and international policymaking. Next slide, please. So why is it important for experts to get involved in international platforms like IPBES? First, international collaboration fosters the exchange of best practices and innovative methodologies, leading to more comprehensive assessments of biodiversity and ecosystem services. It also enables European scientists to contribute to and shape global policies, ensuring that the high-quality research emerging from our region informs decisions that affect biodiversity worldwide. And furthermore, engaging on such platforms creates valuable networking opportunities and partnerships, which are essential for advancing our collective efforts against biodiversity loss. At Biodiversa Plus, we see our role as a catalyst for scientific progress and policy innovation. We bring together researchers and funders, support the science needed to close critical knowledge gaps, contribute to IPBES assessments, and encourage European experts to actively engage in global dialogue. In doing so, we help ensure that biodiversity policies are grounded in the best available science and equipped to meet today's environmental challenges. I would like to encourage all of you to get involved in the work of IPBES. Your expertise is essential to ensuring that the best available science informs decision making and that our collective efforts lead to a more sustainable and biodiverse future for our planet. So thank you for your attention. And with this, I would like to hand back to Marie-Claire.
Thank you so much, Rainer, again for this very inspirational introduction. So now I will introduce you to IPBES and IPBES assessments. So I work at the French Foundation for Research on Biodiversity, which is a partner of Biodiversa Plus, and I'm a task leader on the work package that Rainer presented, and I was a former TSU for the IPBES Sustainable Use of Wild Species Assessment, so the part of the secret area that is dedicated to an IPBES assessment. IPBES, in case you don't know, is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It was established in 2012 by 94 governments then, and it's hosted by UNEP. At the moment, 153 governments are members, and there are more than 600 organizations as observers. The main goal of IPBES is to strengthen knowledge foundations for better policy through science for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and long-term human well-being and sustainable development. There are many functions, like activities within IPBES. The first one is to assess the state of knowledge, which is where the assessments come from. But they also have some functions about building capacities of individuals and institutions to be able to use these assessments. They also have some functions about the generation of knowledge and management of data. They also identify and promote the development and use of policy instruments, policy support tools and methodologies. And finally, there's a function about strengthening the involvement of members and stakeholders to increase the visibility of IPBES and have more people use its products. So what we focus on here today is the first function on the assessment of knowledge. So far, there are 14 assessments being published, the last one being the one on business and biodiversity, and I invite you to all have a look at them on IPBES website. We also have 2 workshops reports, one on biodiversity and pandemics that was done during COVID, and one joint with IPCC on biodiversity and climate change. And what is now an assessment report? So usually an assessment have a glossary and 5 to 6 chapters, and then there's a summary for policymakers. So it's important to note that IPBES does not produce new knowledge. It synthesizes existing knowledge and then produce recommendations based on that. The chapters, they are written by the authors of the assessment, usually a team between 50 to 150, depending on how big the assessment is. They come from different expertise and from all over the world, and they write chapters that contain a summary of existing, well-established and widely shared knowledge, but also more centered knowledge and knowledge gap. The summary for policy makers is a summary of the chapters, but written for the negotiators that will negotiate the document in plenary, in an IPBES plenary session at the end of the assessment, and that will be what will be used by the decision makers. And just so you know, an assessment is usually 3 to 4 years. It's a little shorter for fast track assessment, as they call. They have external reviews open to all for all the assessments. That's what we're talking about today. And again, the summary for policymaker is approved by IPBES member state, so the 153 members I talked about before. The production of IPBES assessment, just a very quick overview. So the governments are the one requesting for a topic. And then when the topic is agreed, they have some authors writing a scoping, basically putting a frame around the assessment, what is going to be about, what is not going to be about. Then they find some authors to write the assessment. Authors write together the chapters and the summary for policymakers. The one rely on the others a lot. Then they go through external review. There's 2 for the second global assessment. One now, there's going to be another one in 2027. Then obviously authors work on answering the comments, integrating them. The governments also review the chapters and summary for policymakers, all these to the final versions of the chapters and summary for policymakers that will be approved line by line in plenary by the governments. And where we are now, just so you know, in case you're interested, so the second global assessment is here, so we are in the middle of it. This is planned to be approved in 2028, and there were recently 2 other external review, whereas actually the monitoring was last year, and there's still the one on spatial planning and ecological connectivity that is open until the end of the month, if you're interested. And so now, what is a reviewer? So a reviewer participates in the review process by evaluating chapters and or summary for policymakers, depending on what is available, what you are interested, looking for scientific accuracy, balance, and completeness. You can review individual sections, a figure, full chapter, the entire thing. It's up to your expertise and availability. Anyone with relevant expertise can register. And when you register, then you have access to all the draft, providing that you click a box saying that you will not cite the draft, quote them, or distribute them because they are confidentials. The drafts are indeed not made public before the final document is approved at the final plenary. Also, so you know, all reviewers are acknowledged publicly with their names, affiliations, and country in an annex to the published reports at the end when everything is approved, and all comments and their responses will obviously be made available after publication. Why should you review an IPBES assessment and give some of your time for it? This is about ensuring scientific rigor and balance. As comprehensive the author team is, they cannot have all the knowledge in the world and may miss some things, and they're also looking for more literature, and so it's your task to critique and improve the draft's accuracy, comprehensiveness, and objectivity. This helps guarantee that the final assessment is scientifically robust, unbiased, and credible. This is also about increasing transparency and trust by opening the draft to experts and government reviews. This ensures transparency of the assessments. It increases the impact of your expertise and research. As a reviewer, you can make sure that your area of expertise is well covered in the assessment, and if relevant, ask the authors to cite your research, academic or grey literature. This is also important to capture diverse perspective and knowledge, so broad participation in the review process, including scientists, practitioners, policymakers, representatives of indigenous people and local communities, Those help ensure that diversity of perspective and relevant literature are considered. And finally, it's important to identify and close knowledge gaps. So you can highlight areas where important evidence or viewpoints may be missing, as well as point out inconsistencies or uncertainties that require clarification. And you can also indicate imbalances and bias in the presentation of knowledge that the authors, again, might not be aware of. And so now, without transition, Emma will present the second global assessment and where input is most needed.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I presume almost everyone's also in an afternoon time frame. So hello from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. I'm going to talk about the second global assessment. I'm, as it says here, a CLA on chapter 3. And I'll go through the chapters as well. I'm going to talk about a bit of background, general description. I'll go through the chapter outline and talk about the cross-cutting themes, and then we'll talk about the external review process. Next slide, please. So the first external review period is actually running at the moment. It goes from the 15th of June to the 7th of August. Next slide, please. And I'm going to talk a bit about the assessment background and general description, kicking off with the assessment team. Next slide, please. So in terms of background, as Marie-Claire has shown, normally topics are requested by governments and then they're approved by the IPBES plenary. So the plenary approved the undertaking of a second global assessment to be considered at IPBES 14. And the objective is to look at relevant knowledge that's become available since the publication of the first global assessment report. So that's a significant mandate for this global assessment. And also look at progress towards achieving key goals around sustainability and biodiversity conservation. We're looking at strengthening the science policy interface with biodiversity and looking at nature's contributions to people on a range of spatial scales, and hopefully providing the knowledge and policy support tools that we need to underlie informed decision-making. Next slide, please. So the assessment team, so this was for the first author draft. We've got 3 chairs. So Becky Chaplin-Kramer, Nick Oguja, who's a colleague of mine, who was also on the Africa assessment with me, and Zilu. Those are our 3 co-chairs. The technical support unit is hosted by the IPBES Secretariat in Bonn. The expert group has 20 coordinating lead authors, 64 lead authors, 12 review editors and 12 fellows. And then we have a management committee bottom left, which includes David Obiora, who is currently the IPBES chair. Next slide, please. So the scope and rationale, as I've said, is a fundamental objective is to look at basically what knowledge has become available since the first global assessment, and also look at our progress towards achieving goals. So the specific objectives focus on multilateral environmental agreements and the 2030 Agenda and SDGs, looking at the global targets for 2030 and for 2050 of the GBF, and then also looking at those additional efforts that we would need to achieve the 2050 vision for biodiversity. So not just building on the first global assessment, but also on other prior assessments, looking at new evidence, looking at challenges, but also trying to highlight positive examples and key lessons. Very important, looking at critical gaps. So oceans, components of biodiversity that have been neglected, looking at multiple worldviews, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, and then also relevant social issues and groups. And looking at different challenges, but also focusing on lessons learned and potential solutions. We've had a significant discussion about trying to take a constructive approach. And last of all, synthesizing the differing roles of actors. Next slide, please. So the geographic coverage is looking both globally and regionally. So IPBES has got particular regions that we look at, looking at all biogeographic and oceanographic zones from regional to global level, and then looking at terrestrial, inland water, coastal, and marine ecosystems. And just a clarification, we used to talk about freshwater ecosystems, but we now talk about inland water. That's our new terminology. It's rather more encompassing in terms of inland water ecosystems. Yes, my colleague Igor on chapter 3. We've had some very interesting discussions around that, and we feel that it's far more accurate. In terms of the temporal coverage, so prioritizing 2011 to 2020 is the reference period, looking at trends up to 2025 and focusing primarily on the past 50 years, then looking at future pathways up to 2100, and this differs between the chapters as far forward as relevant, with a particular focus on the 2030 to 2050 period. And we are looking at using long-term historical data as an information source for baselines and looking at contemporary reference states. So, for example, we're doing some work around that with invasive alien species at the moment, looking at long-term historical data. Next slide, please. So, the chapter outline. So it's very common in IPBES assessments that chapter 1 is the chapter that basically sets the scene. So as here in the second global assessment, chapter 1 basically sets the scene. It talks about the IPBES conceptual framework and then also particular changes in international biodiversity policy. And I know that that chapter are also not just looking at international biodiversity policy, but also more broadly or at the multilateral environmental agreements. So in terms of different worldviews, in this global assessment, we have a chapter that is specifically focusing on different knowledge systems and the role of Indigenous peoples and local communities. So diverse and plural values and worldviews, and importantly, their relevance for driving transformative change, thinking about reciprocal relationships between nature and people, looking at the roles of social relationships, kinship, caring, and the guardianship of nature, which would include different governance models, looking at responses to changing social, cultural, economic, and environmental conditions. And importantly, IPLC and different knowledge systems it's hosted in chapter 2, but it's treated as a cross-cutting topic through the chapters. So in our chapter 3, for example, we are taking time, for example, to look at IPLC case studies and how that can lead into thinking about status and trends. Next slide, please. So chapter 3 is the really, really big chapter. It's divided into 4 sub-chapters. The sub-chapter on which I work is direct and indirect drivers. There is good quality of life, direct and indirect drivers, nature, and then finally nature's contributions to people. And all of those are sub-chapters within a very large kind of overarching chapter, if you like. We've worked on those together and separately, so recognizing key connections amongst those 4 elements and the way in which they weave into each other. We're looking at a range of indicators to present the trends, including for the global goals, but not just for those. We are focusing on the global level, but also looking at representing regional status and trends, and we're under discussion at the moment around how to do that amongst the IPBES different regions. And finally, as I've said, in terms of looking at cross-cutting evidence on the role and contributions of Indigenous peoples and local communities. So, for example, where Indigenous peoples and local communities conservation governance as a case study contributes to species recovery. That's something where we're having a lot of discussions around that. Next slide, please. In chapter 4, future pathways. So that's where we consider scenarios and models, where the urgency of action is. Importantly, and Ren has already spoken about the notion of transformation, the idea of transformative pathways, and what drives us towards particular transformative pathways. And then last of all, importantly, and we've looked at this in previous IPBES assessments as well, what are the consequences of inaction? So moving on from what we know about the consequences of inaction as we move forward. And last of all, chapter 5, roughly the response chapter, where we focus on learning from past action, importantly, building on positive examples. What can we learn from successful examples? Analyzing a portfolio of options for action, considering governance and stakeholders. Again, IPLCs is a cross-cutting topic, looking at the implications of multilateral processes for IPLCs, and then a significant section on financing. And that, I think, if I can elaborate a little bit, since the global assessment in 2019, our knowledge base around finance for nature has massively expanded. And it has also become a lot more important, and we know a great deal more about how the finance landscape for nature, well, the finance landscape for nature and against nature, if you like. We know a great deal more about that. So that's going to be a very, very interesting section indeed. Next slide, please. So there are different cross-cutting themes at the moment. Those are represented by different task groups. There's one focusing on the IPBES conceptual framework. There is the group that I'm a part of, which is focusing on climate change, and we have a joint workshop on biodiversity and climate change coming up in August in Switzerland. That's also building on the work of the previous IPBES report, well, joint report between IPBES and IPCC. We hope to update some of those findings. There's a cross-cutting theme on coastal and marine systems, one on units of assessment, one focusing on case studies and the rationale for inclusion or exclusion of case studies, one focusing on transformation, so bringing in some of the thinking around the transformative assessment, specifically one focusing on the glossary, where the IPBES fellows, early career researchers are very involved. And then last of all, as I've said, a very active cross-cutting theme on Indigenous and local knowledge. Next slide, please. So, external review and next steps. Marie-Claire, I'm going through this, or are you?
I think this slide I can talk about later, but you can go over the timeline.
Right, so this is the assessment timeline. This is the thing that the technical support unit in Bonn enjoys sending out updates on, so they can remind us where we are and where we're going. So if we look at the road behind us, the first author meeting took place in November last year in Paris. We then produced a zero order draft in late January, and we have now produced a first order draft, which is going out for the first external review. So you can see from the red slide, we are here, the first external review. We have a second ILK dialogue workshop on the go at the moment in Nairobi, which is why Isabel couldn't be here. We then have, as I've mentioned, the Biodiversity and Climate Change workshop in August, which will be in Switzerland and will be effectively one of the things that they're doing is looking at the work between IPBES and IPCC, of course, have the 7th assessment report going at the moment. We're on very similar timeframes. What are some of the common findings that can be updated since the first time we looked at common findings? Our second author meeting and first summary for policymakers meeting will be in October in Bangkok, at which point we hope to produce the second draft of the chapters and the first draft of the summary for policymakers, which is going to be later in that meeting. And we will have a second summary for policymakers meeting in the first quarter of next year. We then have a second external review process in the second quarter of next year and a third ILK dialogue workshop. And then we have a third author meeting and third summary for policymakers meeting in the third quarter of 2027. And at that point, we effectively move to the final versions of the chapters, the final version of the summary for policymakers. We'll have another meeting in Q2 of 2028 and a final government review in the third quarter of 2028. And we then have IPBES 14, where the second global assessment effectively comes under consideration by the plenary and hopefully will be approved when we hope to hit the gavel. So it's a tight time frame. I can say the authors have worked extremely hard to get where we are at the moment. The period of time between November and January for the zero order draft was pretty tight, but there's been a lot of goodwill and wonderful energy, and we are really looking forward to hearing what the reviewers have to say. Next slide, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you so much, Emma. And I started to have a look myself at the second global assessment, and chapter 3 is quite substantial. I'm very impressed by the amount of content you have put in there already. So now, without spoiling everything, how to register and write comments that have more chance to be taken into account. So this is meant to scare you, right? This is just an example of a few comments made on a few lines in one chapter. The authors, they have that time like 3,000, right? So they have so many comments and it looks like this, and it's pretty daunting and overwhelming. So how can you make sure that your comments doesn't just like slip through, and like just be, well, no comments are ignored, but it's important to write your comments in a certain way so that it's better considered. So first, comments have to be provided in English using the Excel comments sheets provided by the review system of IPBES. Obviously, they have to be submitted before the deadline, but unfortunately, some people still try to give comments on the PDF or send them after, and this will not be allowed. You can leave one comment, you can leave 30 comments, 300, completely up to you. Again, your expertise and availability. Review comments should focus on substantive issues only, so no need to be focusing on there's a comma missing there, this word is spelled wrong there. It's kind of like making everyone waste time, as in the whole assessment will go through a grammar check at the end anyway. If several comments are identical on two different parts of the documents, you have to copy and paste the comment again. If you just say see previous comments, they actually won't be able to check it and find it. So it's important to rewrite your comment. And of course, avoid the first person and use polite sentences. I would say the basics. It's important to criticize, but also praise the content of the assessment. Don't hesitate to also say what you like. So for example, you have a paragraph when you have like 10 people who have some comments about it. Well, I'm not sure about this, actually, maybe not this way, blah, blah, blah. And there's no good comments. Then the authors are just going to think that maybe this section should just be deleted because no one likes it, or it doesn't make consensus and we don't have much information about this. Whereas if more people had said, well, actually, this is very good, maybe you can add this to that, then they're more likely to keep the section. So it's also important to say what you like. Obviously, it's nice to criticize, but also to come up with solutions. So you can propose new text or alternatives if relevant. It's important to examine consistency and relevance. So for example, if you're an expert on coastal ecosystems and you're reviewing multiple chapters, you can also check that it's consistent between the chapters, because even though there are cross-cutting themes and teams working on it, it's difficult to keep track of possible redundancy between the chapters. Verify the completeness of the assessment results and request the addition of academic or gray references. So whatever you know, whatever you wrote, you can submit it, and of course provide the full reference, the DOI, or if it's like gray literature, you can even say, you can write the comments and send an email to the TSU or Secretariat to send it in a separate email to make sure that it is received to be cited. You can request some text to be clarified or nuanced or rephrased. And it's also the time to introduce yourself as a contributing author. So a contributing author is someone who's going to be cited in the assessment as a contributing author first, who's going to write a piece of text, so like usually a box, a figure, a little section about a certain, on its field of expertise. And the authors are always looking for experts in some fields, because like I said, you know, like as comprehensive the team is, they don't have all the expertise and ecosystem represented. It's just not possible. And so they're going to be looking for contributing authors, especially after this first review. So if yourself are expert on a topic that you think should be more present in the assessment, you can very welcomely leave a comment saying, I'm an expert on this, I can write something about it, this is my contact details. And so then the team can look for you and contact you and ask you to write a piece of text. Suggested step for effectively review the assessment. We talked about the scoping. So this frame of the assessment, the report is available online, and it's good to check it before so you can check, so you can have in mind the mandate given by the authors. So for example, they may not be looking at a specific topic that you would have liked to see, but before you leave 100 of comments saying, well, why is there not this, why is there not this, and that the authors just answer, well, it's not in the scoping, you know. So better check that before, so you're sure that the authors can write about this, and so you make effective comments. You can also check the chapters descriptions in the scoping report on top of the presentation from Emma to identify beforehand which sections corresponds to your area of expertise so you can directly focus where you're more needed. This is not relevant here, but for more the second external review, but just so you know, if you review a summary for policymakers, you have to read the background sections before the key messages, so you don't make comments about something mentioned later. And it's kind of, it's like in the chapters, you also have executive summaries, they're called, where they kind of like summarize the chapter. So I wouldn't make comments on this. I would check the chapters first and then make comments on it. Now, just down to earth, how to register as a reviewer. You have to create an account on IPBES website if you do not have one already, and you can only register to become a reviewer if you are logged in. This is not the most, the nicest website, let's just say, so you have to go through it. First, you create an account, then when you're logged in, you go to this link and you end up on this page where you register, you fill it with your information, you say, yes, I will not share this assessment or quote or cite it. Then you can access this page where you can, well, there's again telling you a bit how it works. You can download all the chapters on your computers and the spreadsheet associated. So it looks like this. This is just an Excel table. You should not modify the structure of the table because then when you submit it, it goes like an automatic system. So if you modify it, your comments will not be taken into account. A little tip is to use two screens, one side the assessment, one side the Excel sheet. When you're done, you add everything into that button. And just so you know, when you're a reviewer, you can also sign up to an IPBES dialogue. So this is kind of like what we're doing now, but way bigger because it's open to everyone in the world. And it's on the 10th of July. There's 2 sessions. And it's a dialogue with government and stakeholders to present a bit the assessments and how the process is going if you have any questions. But it's only in English. And so that was an overview of IPBES, the review system, the second global assessment. So if you have any question now about the assessment, but also questions about the review, please ask us. There's no wrong question, and I will actually stop the recording now